We're going to install the flywheel. Use the crank lock pin to install the flywheel so we could torque everything down correctly. If you watch the timing belt video, you would know where the hole is in the side of the block for putting the crank lock pin in. Also want to make sure the crank is lined up with the marking on the crank pulley and on the crank pulley plastic housing. I already went ahead and aligned these two marks up here, so this side's ready to go. Get the O-ring out without damaging it. Look in there, make sure you can see the hole for the crank lock pin, which it's there. Just a little bit off. Next we'll be able to test it on there. Alright, so that's good to go. On the flywheel, it can only go on one way. When you line up the flywheel, you have to make sure everything lines up. One hole might go in, or you might get 3 or 4 bolts in, and then you'll see that it doesn't line up. It's because you didn't align the flywheel correctly. After we get the bolts sort of in, we need to torque all these down to 60 Newton meters, and we'll do a cross pattern. Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and torque this down to 60 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Let me go ahead and mark them. From here, I'll have to turn this 90 degrees. All right, there you go. Now there are some books that will want you to do 60 Newton meters plus 180. That's just crazy. I know people that have tried that and actually broken the flywheel bolt by doing that. So most of us come up with that if you just do 60 Newton meters plus 90 degree, you'll be okay. And that's what I do on my car with, over 700 horsepower. The flywheel hasn't come flying off yet, so this procedure works really well. Next, we're going to be installing the clutch. Now, this is a Stage 2 street from Southbend, and the street version of the pressure plate uses the sack mechanism, just like on an OEM car. If you got the race version or the endurance version, it would not have the sack mechanism on it. On the pressure plate, you'll be using these new 6mm hex bolts. I always tell people to buy new ones. They're 30 cents each. Just buy new ones. There's 6 of them. So let's go ahead and install them. I already put some Loctite on it. Another thing on the sack mechanism, when you receive this in shipping, make sure the springs are all the way back. If this mechanism is all the way forward, you're going to have to compress this and move everything back. All right? The torque on these is 23 Newton meters. When you tighten these, just don't tighten it all the way. Just do a little turns here and there, and then do a cross pattern. Clutch is installed. The next thing we're going to do is install the transmission, but before that, don't forget to uninstall the crank block pin and put all that stuff back together. I'm going to go ahead and do that next, and then after that, we'll start doing the transmission. Install the throwout bearing in this transmission. Go ahead and take all this apart. Now I would go ahead and lube all this stuff with some grease. On here. Need Loctite on this bolt. Throwout bearings installed. This transmission is ready to go back in. Remember when I was taking off the transmission bolts were all in the wrong locations, and I was saying that I have a manual that tells you exactly where each bolt goes. Well, here's that manual. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the manual, measure the bolts, and mark them so I know exactly where they go. Alright, so before I put the transmission, I'm going to put my guide pins in. These were just regular transmission bolts. I cut the heads off of them. This helps in guiding the transmission into the correct spot. Don't forget to install your spacer as well. Transmission is lined up. Now I just need to wiggle it and finesse it to actually line up with the splines. Sometimes that could be very frustrating. I've taken 45 minutes before to try to get those splines to line up. Sometimes it'll take 2 seconds and it just goes right in. Most of the time I have to wiggle it around and then it'll finally pop in. You do not want to put the bolts in here and force it in. You just want to keep working it until this actually will pop in and lay flat against this spacer. Don't forget, these large bolts, they require 65 newton meters of torque, so when you torque them down, and then these two 8mm hex bolts that go underneath, these are torqued down with 45 newton meters of torque. There you have it, transmissions in.